Imagine losing everything over a single, false accusation, thrown to the streets with nothing but the clothes on your back. Disgraced Maid meets a powerful billionaire but quickly promises deeper conflict, a tale of corporate betrayal, dangerous secrets, and a love that defied every social boundary. Esther's humble, solitary existence. She is an orphan, quiet, hardworking, and her entire world revolves around her position at an exclusive cleaning service. This establishes her as the quintessential underdog with virtually nothing to lose, making her subsequent eviction more tragic. The inciting incident occurs almost immediately when Esther is preparing an expensive designer gown for a high-profile client event. Vanessa, the well-dressed and vindictive client, and secretly a billionaire's fiancée, falsely accuses Esther of damaging the irreplaceable fabric. This minor, fabricated offense leads directly to her being fired and thrown out onto the wealthy street. The heavy oak doors of the boutique slammed behind Esther with a finality that echoed through her chest. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small canvas bag containing everything she owned, a spare uniform, a worn paper bag, and the silver locket her mother had left her. The afternoon sun felt cruel against her skin, mocking her as she stood frozen on the pristine sidewalk of the city's wealthiest district. Around her, luxury cars glided past like indifferent sharks. Women in designer heels clicked by without a glance. No one stopped. No one cared. She was invisible here, always had been, except when they needed someone to blame. Vanessa's words still rang in her ears, "You've ruined everything, you clumsy little nobody." The lie had been so effortless, so casually delivered. The fabric hadn't been damaged at all, but who would believe a maid over a woman dripping in diamonds? Esther's legs finally moved, carrying her away from the boutique, away from the only stability she'd known in 3 years. Her small room above the shop, her modest paycheck, her fragile dreams of night school, all gone in the span of 10 minutes. Panic clawed at her throat as the reality settled in. She had nowhere to go. No family. No friends who could help. The $50 in her pocket wouldn't even cover a week's rent in the cheapest boarding house. By nightfall, she found herself wandering through the industrial district near the docks. The air here smelled of salt and rust, and shadows pulled thick between abandoned warehouses. Her feet ached, her stomach growled, but she kept walking until she spotted a structure with broken windows and a door hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dark, filled with the ghost of forgotten cargo. Esther found a corner behind some rotting pallets, spread her spare uniform on the concrete floor, and called into herself. The cold seeped through her thin dress, and somewhere in the distance, she heard voices, rough, male, dangerous. She pulled her back closer and closed her eyes, wondering how one ruined gown could destroy an entire life. Dawn broke grey and unforgiving over the docks. Esther woke with her body stiff from the concrete floor, her breath visible in the cold air. The voices from the night before had faded, replaced by the distant clang of metal and the deep horn of a cargo ship. She had survived one night. She needed to survive many more. By mid-morning, she stood at the edge of the port's hiring area, a chaotic stretch of pavement where the laborers gathered like desperate birds waiting for scraps. Men in stained work clothes eyed her with curiosity and dismissal. A woman here was an anomaly, especially one as slight as Esther. "You looking for work?" A foreman with a clipboard and a cigarette dangling from his lips approached, his gaze skeptical. "Yes, sir." "Anything?" He looked her up and down, then shrugged. "Cargo haul. $15 for the day. Cash. No questions. $15. Barely enough for a meal and a night somewhere safer. But it was something. The work was punishing. Wooden crates that seemed to weigh as much as she did had to be moved from the loading dock to the warehouse floor. Her arms screamed in protest after the first hour. Splinters dug into her palms. Sweat soaked through her dress despite the cold. Around her, men twice her size grunted and cursed, moving with the efficiency of those who'd done this for years. Esther refused to stop. Every time her muscles threatened to give out, she thought of Vanessa's smug face, of the boutique door slamming shut, of sleeping another night on cold concrete. She gritted her teeth and lifted another crate. By noon, her hands were bleeding. By mid-afternoon, she could barely feel them. The foreman watched her with something between surprise and pity, but he said nothing. When the sun finally began to set, he handed her 3 crumpled bills. "You're tougher than you look." Esther took the money with trembling fingers, too exhausted to respond. As she turned to leave, her vision blurred. The ground tilted beneath her feet. She stumbled, caught herself against a shipping container, and forced her legs to keep moving. She couldn't afford to collapse. Not yet. Not here. The 3rd day at the docks, Esther's body finally betrayed her. She had made it through 2 more brutal shifts, sleeping in the warehouse, eating cheap bread and water, forcing herself upright each morning through sheer willpower. But willpower had limits, and hers had run out. The crate she was carrying, heavier than the others, filled with engine parts, slipped from her grip. She tried to catch it, but her arms had nothing left to give. The world spun violently, her knees buckled, and she crumpled to the ground beside the fallen cargo. Voices swirled above her, distant and distorted. She tried to stand, to apologize, to prove she could keep walking, but her body refused every command. "Get a medic," someone shouted. "She's been out here 3 days straight," another voice said. "Damn fool girl." Then a different voice cut through the chaos, deep, authoritative, laced with something she couldn't quite place. Concern, maybe. Or anger. What happened here? Esther forced her eyes open. Through the blur, she saw polished black shoes, tailored charcoal trousers, a figure that didn't belong among the grime and sweat of the docks. The man crouched beside her, and her vision cleared enough to take him in, sharp jaw, dark eyes that studied her with unsettling intensity, a green suit jacket that probably cost more than she'd earn in a year. "Sir, she's just a day laborer," the foreman stammered. Collapsed from exhaustion. "We'll get her out of your way." "How long has she been working here?" The man's tone was ice. 3 days, Mr. Royce. Mr. Royce. Even through her haze, Esther knew that name. Alexander Royce. The shipping magnate who owned half the port and controlled more wealth than entire neighborhoods combined. His gaze returned to her, and she felt exposed under its weight. "Get her water. Now." He waited until someone thrust a bottle into his hands, then helped her sit up with surprising gentleness. "Drink. Slowly." Esther obeyed, the cool water like salvation against her parched throat. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Esther." Her voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "Esther." He repeated it as though committing it to memory. "And what brings someone like you to my docks, working yourself to death for $15 a day?" The kindness in his question broke something inside her. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "I had nowhere else to go." Alexander Royce didn't make a habit of involving himself in the lives of day laborers. He had entire departments dedicated to human resources, worker safety, operational efficiency. But something about the exhausted woman with bleeding hands and haunted eyes had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter he couldn't ignore. By evening, he sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, a glass of bourbon untouched on his desk. His assistant had compiled the information with characteristic efficiency. Esther Lohan, 24, orphaned at 16, employed at Belmont Luxury Cleaning Services for 3 years. Exemplary record. Never late. Never complained. Terminated 5 days ago for alleged property damage. The name of the client who'd filed the complaint made his jaw tighten, Vanessa Hartley. His fiancée. Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers stippled beneath his chin. He pulled out his phone and dialed the boutique's owner, a woman who owed him a favor from a business loan he'd quietly arranged last year. "Mr. Royce, what a surprise. The incident with Esther Lawn last week. I want the truth. A pause. Then, carefully, Miss Hartley insisted the girl had damaged an expensive gown. But between you and me, sir, we examined the dress thoroughly afterward. There wasn't a single mark on it. Esther was our best worker. I didn't want to fire her, but Miss Hartley threatened to ruin our reputation if we didn't. Alexander's knuckles whitened around the phone. Thank you for your honesty. He ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness, fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Vanessa. Beautiful, charming Vanessa, who smiled for photographers and donated to carefully selected charities. The woman his board of directors approved of, whose family connections opened doors in circles even his wealth couldn't access alone. The woman who destroyed an innocent girl's life over nothing. He thought of Esther's trembling hands accepting that water bottle, the way she'd looked at him with equal parts fear and desperate hope. Nowhere else to go. Because Vanessa had been bored, or vindictive, or simply cruel for the sport of it. Alexander reached for his phone again, scrolling to Vanessa's contact. His thumb hovered over her name, then moved past it. No. This required a different approach. Confronting her would only make her defensive, would let her spin the narrative in her favor. But bringing Esther into his home under his protection, that would reveal exactly who Vanessa really was. The Royce mansion rose from the hillside like a monument to power, all glass and steel and impossible angles, with views that stretched across the city to the ocean beyond. Esther stood in the circular driveway, clutching her small bag, feeling more out of place than she ever had at the docks. Alexander had found her that morning at the warehouse, offering her a position on his household staff. The pay was generous, the accommodations included, and the work, he'd assured her, would be nothing like hauling cargo. She'd accepted before he could change his mind, before she could question why a billionaire would personally recruit a maid. Now, following him through the towering front doors, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The interior was as intimidating as the exterior, marble floors that reflected the afternoon light, artwork that belonged in museums, furniture that looked too expensive to touch. A middle-aged woman in a crisp uniform approached, introducing herself as Clara, the head housekeeper. She welcomed Esther with warmth that felt almost suspicious in its sincerity. Mr. Royce has requested you start immediately, Clara explained, leading her toward the east wing. Your quarters are. Alexander. The voice sliced through the foyer like a blade. Esther turned and felt her blood turn to ice. Vanessa Hartley descended the curved staircase in a silk dress that probably cost more than Esther's entire former salary. Her beauty was undeniable, sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled dark hair, the kind of elegance that came from generations of wealth. But her eyes, fixed on Esther, held nothing but venom. What is she doing here? Vanessa's voice rose with each word. Alexander appeared from his study, his expression carefully neutral. Esther is joining our household staff. I trust that won't be a problem. A problem. Vanessa's laugh was sharp, humorless. She descended the remaining steps, her heels clicking ominously against marble. You brought the clumsy little nobody who ruined my dress into our home. She ruined nothing. Alexander's tone was ice. A fact you're well aware of. Vanessa's face flushed, but the fury in her eyes only intensified. She turned that fury on Esther, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. Touch anything valuable, and I'll make sure you disappear for good this time. The threat hung in the air, palpable and real. Esther's hands began to tremble, but she forced herself to meet Vanessa's gaze, to not shrink away. Clara gently touched Esther's arm. Come. Let me show you to your room. As they walked away, Esther felt Vanessa's stare burning into her back like a brand. The dinner party was Vanessa's domain, her stage. 2 weeks after Esther's arrival, the mansion filled with the city's elite, business moguls, politicians, socialites dripping in diamonds. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect light over the long dining table where 20 guests sat in designer clothes, discussing mergers and vacation homes with practiced ease. Esther moved through the room with the other staff, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. She'd learned to make herself invisible, to anticipate needs before they were voiced. But invisibility meant nothing when someone was determined to see you. "Oh, this wine is dreadful," Vanessa announced suddenly, her voice cutting through the polite conversation. She held up her glass with exaggerated distaste. "Who poured this?" The room fell silent. Esther's stomach dropped as every eye turned toward her. "I believe it was Esther," Vanessa continued, her smile venomous. "Our newest addition. Tell me, dear, can you even read the labels on these bottles, or did you just grab whatever was closest?" Heat flooded Esther's face. The bottle had been a 2015 Bordeaux, exactly what Vanessa had requested from Clara's list. But contradicting her employer's fiancée in front of guests was unthinkable. "I apologize, Miss Hartley. I'll bring another." "No need to apologize for incompetence," Vanessa said sweetly. "Some people simply aren't suited for civilized environments. Perhaps dock work was more your speed." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with the detached curiosity of people accustomed to spectacle. Alexander set down his fork with deliberate precision. The sound seemed to echo. "The wine is a 2015 Chateau Margaux, Vanessa. One of the finest vintages in our cellar." His voice was calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath it. "Esther poured exactly what you requested this morning." Vanessa's smile faltered. "I simply meant." "And her attention to detail has been impeccable since she arrived." Alexander lifted his glass, examining the deep red liquid. "Far more reliable than most." His gaze swept the table, landing briefly on his fiancée with unmistakable meaning. The guests found sudden interest in their plates. Vanessa's face flushed crimson, her humiliation now reflecting back at her. Alexander turned to Esther, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Esther. This will be all for now." She managed a small nod and retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking. Behind her, conversation slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Alexander's subtle defense had been noted, measured, and, judging by Vanessa's rigid posture, absolutely understood. The war had just escalated. Alexander's office occupied the mansion's highest floor, a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a conquest already won. Esther had been tasked with organizing the bookshelves, a job Clara insisted Mr. Royce had specifically requested her for. She worked methodically, dusting leather-bound volumes on economics and philosophy, straightening framed photographs of ships and skylines. The room smelled of expensive cologne and old paper, intimate in a way that made her hyper-aware of every sound. "You don't have to be quite so careful. They're just books." Esther startled, nearly dropping the volume in her hands. Alexander stood in the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too many responsibilities for too long. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't hear you come in." "Alexander," he corrected, moving to his desk. "We are alone. You don't need to perform formality." He settled into his chair, studying her with that unsettling intensity she'd noticed at the docks. "How are you adjusting?" "Fine." The lie came automatically. "Esther." Her name was gentle reproach. "I saw what happened at dinner. Vanessa has been," he paused, choosing words carefully, "difficult. She has every right to dislike me, Sir Alexander. I did spill water on her dress. Even saying it felt like betrayal, but loyalty to truth felt more important than vindication." Something flickered in his expression. "Respect, maybe. Or sadness. You're remarkably forgiving for someone who suffered because of a lie." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Esther's hand stilled on the bookshelf. You know? I know. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. The dress was never damaged. The boutique owner confirmed it. Vanessa wanted you gone, so she made you gone. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what kind of person he stopped himself. Esther turned to face him fully. Why did you bring me here? Really? Because you deserve better than bleeding on dog concrete for $15 a day. His honesty was almost painful. And because I needed to see if my suspicions about Vanessa were justified. He stood, crossing to the window. They were. And they're worse than I imagined. What do you mean? Alexander's reflection in the glass looked troubled. Trust is currency in my world, Esther. Once it's spent, it's nearly impossible to regain. He glanced back at her. You've never asked me for anything. Never tried to leverage your position or your proximity to me. That's rare. Vanishingly rare. I'm just trying to survive. No, he said quietly. You're trying to live with integrity. There's a difference. Vanessa watched from the second-floor landing as Alexander and Esther emerged from his office together. The way he looked at the girl, with something dangerously close to admiration, made Vanessa's blood simmer with rage she could barely contain. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of watching Alexander defend the little nobody, of feeling his growing distance, of sensing the engagement she'd cultivated so carefully beginning to slip through her perfectly manicured fingers. The dinner party humiliation still burned. The whispers among their social circle had already begun. He defended the maid over his own fiancée. Unacceptable. That evening, after Alexander left for a business dinner downtown, Vanessa made her move. She waited until the household had settled into its nighttime routine, until Clara had retired and the other staff had retreated to their quarters. Then she slipped into Alexander's study, her heart racing with equal parts fury and calculated precision. The safe behind the painting of his first cargo ship, she'd watched him open it a dozen times, memorized the combination during one of their early dates when he'd still been foolish enough to trust her completely. Inside, nestled among legal documents and backup drives, was the decoy. She'd heard him mention it to his head of security last week, a test drive meant to catch whoever had been leaking company information. Vanessa had been careful with those leaks, routing everything through encrypted channels and offshore contacts. But careful wasn't enough anymore. She needed a scapegoat, and fate had delivered one directly into her hands. The small black drive felt weightless in her palm, innocuous for something that could destroy a life. She closed the safe, replaced the painting, and moved silently through the darkened mansion. Esther's room was in the staff wing, modest but clean, with a single bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the gardens. The door wasn't locked. Why would it be? The girl had nothing worth stealing. Vanessa slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. She moved to the dresser, opening the top drawer carefully. Inside were folded uniforms, a worn paperback, that ridiculous silver locket the girl never took off. Vanessa placed the hard drive beneath the uniforms, positioning it carefully so it would be immediately visible when the drawer was opened fully. Perfect. She withdrew, closing the door with barely a sound, and returned to the main house. Tomorrow, she would orchestrate Alexander's need for that specific drive. Tomorrow, she would lead him to discover exactly what kind of thief he'd welcomed into his home. Tomorrow, Esther would learn that mercy was a luxury reserved for people who mattered. The morning began ordinarily enough. Esther was polishing silver in the dining room when Vanessa's scream shattered the mansion's calm. Alexander. Alexander, come quickly. Footsteps thundered from multiple directions. Alexander emerged from his study, his expression already wary. Clara appeared from the kitchen, concern etched across her face. 2 security guards materialized in the foyer, hands instinctively moving toward their radios. Vanessa stood at the top of the staircase, one hand pressed dramatically to her chest, her face a perfect mask of shock and distress. The Mercury Drive. The one for today's acquisition meeting. It's gone from the safe. Alexander's jaw tightened. You're certain? I watched you place it there myself 3 days ago. Vanessa descended the stairs with calculated urgency. Alexander, that drive contains everything: financial projections, acquisition strategies, confidential vendor contracts. If it falls into competitor hands, I'm aware of what's on it. His voice was clipped, controlled, but Esther could see the tension radiating through his shoulders. He turned to his head of security. Initiate lockdown protocol. No one leaves the property until we've conducted a full search. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with something that made Esther's stomach twist. Perhaps we should start with the newest member of the household. She turned that venomous gaze on Esther. After all, she has access to nearly every room. And given her background, corporate espionage might seem like an attractive opportunity. That's absurd, Alexander said, but doubt flickered across his features for just a moment, long enough for Vanessa to see an exploit. Then you won't mind if we search her quarters. Vanessa was already moving, leading the procession like a general commanding troops. To clear her name, of course. Esther's legs felt like lead as she followed, dread pulling in her chest. She knew her room contained nothing incriminating, but Vanessa's confidence was terrifying in its certainty. The staff wing was quiet, almost peaceful, making the invasion feel even more violent. Vanessa threw open Esther's door and went straight to the dresser with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to look. She pulled open the top drawer, pushed aside the uniforms. And there, gleaming black against white fabric, was the hard drive. No. The word escaped Esther's lips as a whisper. No, I didn't. I've never seen that before. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She turned to Alexander, triumph naked on her face. Call the police. Esther watched Alexander's expression close off, watched something die in his eyes as he looked at her. The betrayal there was worse than any accusation. Alexander, please. I didn't take it. I would never. Security, he said quietly, detain her until the authorities arrive. The security guard's hand closed around Esther's arm, but before he could move her toward the door, Alexander raised his hand. Wait. Something in his tone made everyone freeze. He stepped forward, picking up the hard drive from the drawer with careful precision, turning it over in his palm. A slow, cold smile crossed his face, one that held no warmth, only little certainty. This is the decoy drive, he said quietly. The one I placed in the safe specifically to catch a thief. Vanessa's triumphant expression faltered. What are you talking about? The real Mercury drive, the one with actual confidential data, has been in my personal safe deposit box at the bank for the past 2 weeks. Alexander's gaze locked onto Vanessa with surgical precision. This drive contains nothing but tracking software and keystroke logging designed to trace whoever accessed it last. The color drained from Vanessa's face. I initiated a full forensic security audit 6 weeks ago, Alexander continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. After the third suspicious data leaked to Massa Industries. The timestamps are quite revealing. He pulled out his phone, displaying a detailed log. This drive was last accessed from your personal laptop, Vanessa. Yesterday evening at 11:47 p.m. And placed in this room at 11:52 p.m. That's impossible, I never. Vanessa's protest died as Alexander held up another document. The audit also traced 17 separate instances of you transmitting proprietary company information to offshore contacts linked to our primary competitor. Email metadata, financial records, encrypted messages, all recovered. His voice was ice. You've been selling my company's secrets for 8 months. The silence was absolute. Even the security guards looked shocked. Vanessa's mask finally shattered. You don't understand, your company, your money, it was supposed to be ours. But you, her voice turned venomous, I slid into Esther, you started looking at her like she mattered more than me. A nobody. A maid. She does matter more. Alexander's words were simple, devastating. Because she has something you'll never possess. Integrity. He nodded to security. Escort Miss Hartley out. The authorities have been waiting for my call. As Vanessa was led away, screaming threats and accusations, Alexander turned to Esther. The coldness left his expression, replaced by something infinitely gentler. I'm sorry you had to endure that. He took her trembling hands. I suspected Vanessa was behind the leaks, but I needed proof. I never imagined she'd try to frame you. You knew? Esther's voice shook. The whole time. I hoped I was wrong about her. But I was certain I was right about you. He smiled, genuine warmth finally reaching his eyes. Which is why I have a proposition. I'm expanding my charitable foundation, scholarships, job training, opportunities for people like you who deserve better than the world's giving them. I need someone to manage it. Someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Tears blurred Esther's vision. Alexander, I'm not qualified. You will be. I'll fund your education, business, management, whatever you choose. And when you're ready, the position is yours. He paused, vulnerability crossing his features. If you'll have it. And perhaps, eventually, if you'll have me. The mansion that had felt like a battlefield suddenly felt like possibility itself. Yes, Esther whispered. Yes to all of it. What would you do if one lie destroyed everything you'd built? Have you ever met someone who saw your worth when the world refused to? Drop a red heart if Esther's journey moved you, and tell me in the comments, Team Alexander or Team Starting Over. Your story matters too.